Welcome back, Seekers. Tonight, let's talk about Zacharia Sitchin and the Earth Chronicles series. The 12th planet is the first one in that. I first heard about Zach when, in 1990, I went to a UFO conference on Pensacola Beach, Florida. I'd been invited by the neighbor. She said that she and her children were being abducted, and they were anonymously in Bud Hopkins' book. And so I went there to support her, and I never did see her, but I was there from the time the conference started till it ended at night. And I listened to John Mack. I didn't know who he was at the time either. He's a Harvard professor that would study alien abductions. And but he kept talking about Zacharia Sitchin, and the Sumerians, and there's Anunnaki, and a planet called Nibiru, and was just like, what? And so I went across the bridge to the little New Age bookstore called Awakenings back then, and bought all of Zach's books and started reading them. And Mark and I were on vacation then down in Pensacola Beach, and so I was reading the books to him, and we were reading them on the long trip back, and then he started reading them with me, and God bless that man, he married me too. But so we became Zacharia Sitchin. They call them Sitchinites. It's kind of his fan club. You know, you got Swifties, but there's also Sitchinites for Zach's kind of group. Went to go see him at several seminars, and then we started traveling all over the world with him. And one thing I had noticed in the seminars is when people would ask him to speculate, what did he think about this? What did he think about that? And he never would speculate. He said he would only write what could be backed up by things you could find in a museum or ancient text or something like that. He never claimed to find anything new in archaeology. He used things that already had a provenance and used that as research. His books have, dozens of pages of source material listed at the back with footnotes throughout the book and such. So it's meticulously researched. And I know that there's controversy about whether his translations are accurate or not. I don't know. I don't read Sumerian, but I can tell you I spent a lot of time with him, and I know that everything that he wrote, he definitely thought that he had the proof to back it up the way he presented it. I remember we were at a 1995 conference when Comet Hale-Bopp had been discovered, and it was on a super elliptical, elongated orbit, I think around 2,500 year orbit or so. And I asked him whether he thought that that was kind of part of what travels along with Nibiru, all the debris and all the other planets and moons and comets and asteroids that would follow a planet like Nibiru around, whether he thought that that was part of that system, so to speak. And he just looked at me, he's like, that's very interesting, isn't it? But he wouldn't say anything more than that. So I thought whenever you started traveling with him, then maybe you could get him to talk about what he thought. And he wouldn't. He was like, if I can't prove it, I'm not going to say it. It would, because it can be used to diminish the research I've done. So, take it or leave it. But I know that he put his heart and soul in this. One night at dinner, I asked him, I was like, well, how'd you come to write this book? And he kind of winked at his wife, Rita, and said that that was her story. So she's like, girl, my entire apartment has been filled with papers and books for 30 years. And talk, 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 talk. He just talks about this all the time. Talk, 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 talk. She's like, I finally told him, write it and get it out there. I'm tired of listening about it, to it. And just, you get to it and write it down and put it in a book so you can share it with other people. You've done all these decades of research. So he did. And then we have the Earth Chronicles series out of that, and plus there's some companion books, and then there's the Lost Book of Enki, which is my favorite book. That book will haunt you when you read it. The way it's written in prose. It's not like a regular book. It's beautifully written, and it just really, really stays with you. Zach got started on his path. He would tell the story of when he was, I believe he was 8 years old, and he was in school, and they were studying Genesis 6 in Hebrew, and they were talking about the giants, and he thought that there was a better translation and that it really read those who were cast down. So he thinks he's going to, get the gold star of the day and the best student and all of that when he tells his teacher. And instead, he was admonished and said to not question the scripture. And he wasn't questioning the scripture. He was questioning the translation of it. And then there were the verses he would talk about where it says in Genesis, let us make man in our image, and how that's plural with the Elohim, meaning plural gods with a little g. And so that stuck with him, like so many of us. It's what happens when we're kids that really stick with us and shape who we become in our interest as adults. And so that's kind of how Zach got started on that. The Earth Chronicles series is it's like Star Wars and a soap opera, Real Housewives. I mean, it is crazy. In the 12th planet, he introduces us to the Anunnaki, who are the beings that live on the planet Nibiru. I realize if you're not familiar with all of this, it takes a while. It sounds like a whole different language, but if you're interested in these things, Zach's books give you a great foundation for all of it. And because he backs up it, and you can see, that he is getting it from the British Museum or wherever. But he tells the story about, and there's so many layers and interpersonal relationships. So this isn't going to be in depth. This is just going to kind of give you an idea. And I know it kind of sounds crazy, but I promise you that this is well documented. And Zach and Eric von Daniken are basically the grandfathers of the ancient astronaut theory that has, become part of our culture at this point. So, anyway, back to the Earth Chronicles. There's this planet Nibiru, and it has a 3,600-year orbit in our solar system, and it's extremely elongated. So depending on how the planets are moving, we're always on the same path, but we don't always pass by the planets in the same way each year. Anyway, that gets complicated. So sometimes Nibiru comes really close, and sometimes it doesn't. But Nibiru's atmosphere was in trouble, and their scientists thought that they could shoot a fine layer of gold dust, and it would help reflect or keep in, I'm not sure, but it would help the atmosphere with atmospheric problems. The only problem is there wasn't a whole lot of gold on Nibiru. So they came to Earth to mine the gold. And there were way stations on Mars and on the moon, but I'm just going to try to just give you a quick overlay. And so two brothers, Enki and Enlil, came to the planet Earth. And Enki was the scientist, and Enlil was kind of like the accountant. And in the Old Testament, when God seems kind of schizophrenic and like sometimes he loves you and sometimes he's a vengeful God, it's because they've merged those two, Enlil and Enki's personalities together and created one entity when there was actually, um, that is, it wasn't one, it was two. And they were half brothers. Enlil had the higher status in their military or government because Enki was married to his mother, and there's some half-sister things in here. I mean, it's really like Shakespeare. I won't get into all of that. So the two brothers, they come down, and they have different things they're taking care of. They bring about 200,000 of their co-workers with them, Anunnaki. Some of them stay in orbit, and some come down here to mine gold. And after several thousand years, they get fed up with it all, and there's a revolt. So Enki thinks that he can do some genetic manipulation with hominids that are currently on Earth and mix it with some of their genetics and create a worker race. And so like in the Bible, when it says that God reduced their sight, they used to have, what humans would have long vision, and then he shortened their sight, and then he shortened their lifetimes. That was all some different genetic manipulation that was going on while they were trying to create what becomes the atom. So they create us, and we're basically, like seriously, like a slave race. We still are, we work so we can pay our taxes and, bow down to the overlords. But we will not go down that tangent tonight. So they have a revolt. So humans are created. And then there's all this hanky-panky going on between the human women and these demigods and the Anunnaki. And they create hybrids. And Enlil, when in the Bible it says God wasn't happy, humans made too much noise, and basically he's going to wipe us out with a flood. That was the Enlil brother. There was a council of 12, and they decided humans we were a bad lab experiment, gone awry. Just kind of like if we were having a lab experiment, created something and figured out that wasn't so great, and so that we just annihilate it. So that's what the council decided. But Enki was really fond of us because we were his creation. He's the one that figured it out. And so he told, Noah has a different name in the Sumerian tablets, but basically to keep it simple and names that everybody knows. So Enki gets the message to Noah to build the ark, and that there is a huge flood coming. And with the work of Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock and all of that, with the younger Dryas and the impact craters about 12,000 years ago, you can see how what they're discovering now interlays with all the biblical stories. But most cultures have a flood story in it. And like the Sumerians, their flood story is tablets and tablets and tablets long. And in the Bible, you just got a couple of chapters. So there's a lot more extensive source material. The Bible's kind of like the condensed version of several of these events. And like the Tower of Babel, you know, there's a lot longer version of all of that. And Zach said that he really, when he started looking at the Sumerian stuff and he came across the Epic of Creation, he realized that, you know, this was a very detailed story of the creation of our solar system and of our species and how it all worked and how it came to be. And I mean, one of the things that impressed me the most when I read it about the Sumerians and what they knew, like they, according to Zacharias' translation, they said that the Earth was the seventh planet. Well, the only way we're the seventh planet is if you're coming from Pluto, outside the solar system, count Pluto and come in, and then Earth is number 7. Just a side note, I'm Team Pluto, and if the Sumerians 6,000 years ago said that Pluto was a planet, I think it should be grandfathered in and just be a planet. Just saying. And so the Sumerians knew all this astronomical things. And Zach goes into great detail. I will say the first 150 pages of the 12th planet is extremely dense. It doesn't flow like, you know, a story. He's laying the foundation for you to understand where all of this fantastical story comes from and how these things can be found in the museums. And he goes into great detail. But once you get past 150 pages or so, he starts, the story kind of starts flowing, you know, about the brothers. You know, these brothers are sharing women, and anyway, it is a crazy story. There's names you'll know, you know, Isis and Osiris and Zeus, and those books changed my life. I mean, I had always been interested in these sort of things, and then when I was in junior high, we started going to church, and sometimes I just really didn't understand some of the stories in the Bible. I mean, and that it seemed like God was schizophrenic, and, you know, there were just things I just didn't understand. And then now, after reading Zach's books, and he uses the original Hebrew text, I mean, the way he puts it together, it lets you know that some things don't make sense, because the Bible is just a really abridged history of like what the Sumerians had written down. And like the 10 Commandments, the Egyptians had the very same thing. I mean, thousands of years before Moses got those tablets. So they're very, very illuminating. But don't read them if you're not ready for your world to be shifted, because it will shift the way you look and your perspective on things. But they're great books. They're awesome. Let me check my notes and make sure I covered everything I wanted to cover about Sitchin. So I will say that I miss you, Zach. I hope you're doing and researching wherever you are in this transitional world that you exist in now. I miss you, buddy. Thank you for joining me, Seekers. Stay curious. Learn something new every day. See you later.